Big Box of Flicks, the only review show that really tells you about the flick.
Excuse me?
Big Box of Flicks gives you straight talk about movies, everything about movies, all the details about movies.
No.
Big Box of Flicks reviews...
Actually, no. Now that I'm on episode 5, I realize that Big Box of Flicks isn't about reviewing films.
It's not?
No, it's not. Big Box of Flicks is actually about me finding the part of the film that means the most to me and sharing it with you. Which brings me to this week's film, Metropolis. Metropolis was released in 1927 by the great Fritz Lang and is so full of technique and style that will inspire filmmakers for the century to come, it would be almost impossible to perform a comprehensive review of the entire work. Most people know Metropolis for its early depiction of C-3PO's mother, others still for its bizarre use of time clocks. There's so much packed into this movie, you could find something new to behold in just about every viewing. This is why I'm not interested in dissecting the film and talking about what makes it good or bad. Instead, what I'd like to do is just take one idea from this film and talk about it with you. It's an idea that seems to come out of nowhere, but when you're watching Metropolis, it feels organic to this story of people looking for meaning, rulers with empty hearts, and the struggling masses fighting for their rights as human beings. Maria, the spiritual head of the underground, which is actually underground, repeats this idea throughout the film, impressing its importance on both the film's characters and the viewers. The idea is this: the mediator between head and hands must be the heart. Notice it doesn't say that the heart should rule, rather it should mediate. The meaning here is simple. We have the hands that do the work, which belong to the workers. We have the head of state, in this case, Joe Fredersen, whose name I am undoubtedly mispronouncing. Fredersen is running his government like a business, eyeing only the bottom line, forgetting that the hands that do the labor are human hands and not machines, forgetting that the purpose of government is to serve those hands. Fredersen surrounds himself with machines and loses sight of the humanity in his city, his workers, and even himself. If any of this sounds at all familiar, I wouldn't be too surprised. This reminds me a great deal of our politics in the United States for the last couple of decades, and the reason why I can now ask, what can we learn from Metropolis? In my lifetime, I've watched America transition from the nanny state to a place where we lock children in cages. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society was launched right around the time that I was born. This was a legislative and executive agenda that addressed education, medical care, urban problems, rural poverty, and transportation throughout the country. The goal was to improve the lives of most Americans. This isn't a revolutionary idea either. Go as far back as Plato's Republic, and you will see that the justification for government, the reason for government, is to serve those it governs. The reason for tyranny is to serve only a select few by inflicting harm on the rest. In case you thought Trump's government was especially helpful, it's actually tyranny. Pretty much by definition. But that's skipping ahead. The purpose of governments, especially democratically elected governments, is to serve the governed. That's why it's difficult logistically, to speak against such programs as the New Deal or the Great Society. Look at that government giving a helping hand to its own people doesn't really work as an insult. You see? This is not to say that there aren't ways to make it happen. And for my entire life, so-called conservatives, which is actually just a placeholder for gimme, 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 the gimme folks have been warping our government into a tyranny, ignoring Metropolis's message that the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart. Here's an example. Proposition 13. Prop 13 was a ballot measure proposed by and popularized by the very unappealing Howard Jarvis. That's him being insulted in Airplane. Prop 13 caught on in a big way in California and was copied in many states. The premise of this legislation was simple. Property taxes paid for schools. They still do. It's a stupid system. Howard Jarvis and Prop 13 said,
I don't want to have to pay for schools. I hate paying taxes. I don't want to.
They cut property taxes, which cut school funding, and once the legislation passed, schools had to start making do with less. And once they started having to make do with less, other short-sighted conservatives slashed education wherever they could until we reached Betsy de Ignoramus and Trump's plan to eliminate the Department of Education with the Department of Labor. What all of this misses is that any short-term windfall anyone might experience with a tax cut is paid for on the backs of long-term cuts in education. Yes, you pay less in taxes, but you can't do the math that tells you how much. The head and the hands, those being the politicians and their ignorant constituents, are happy that they've reached a compromise, but they've completely neglected the heart. They haven't thought of anyone else, including the children. Empathy would show them what consequences their actions would have beyond their wallets. That's why you need to have a heart and think of others. But we in America have decided we don't need a heart. Heartlessness has become our national sport. And so, we can draw a direct line from Prop 13 to this idiot, Grover Norquist, whose famous quote states,
"Well, I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub."
You get the visual? Norquist wanted to shrink government so more of his rich friends could have more money. But he ignores the fact, just like all Republicans seem to ignore the fact, that government is meant to serve all people, not just the rich. When you shrink the government to benefit the rich, you cannot help but shrink the government at the peril of the poor. But without a heart, what the hell does Norquist care? Right? And I know what you're saying. You're saying, sure, Ken, but those examples come from the 70s and 2001. 1,000,000 years ago. Okay. But this is how the conservative movement in America has progressed for over 40 years, without a care for anyone but themselves and their short-sighted desires. Lacking a heart doesn't make the head or the hands, politicians or workers, any smarter. In fact, it makes them increasingly dull-witted, as we can see now with our latest president, appointed by Electoral College, Donald Dump. He is the president of the selfish and the stupid, and so we cheer him as he divides us. We laugh as those less fortunate suffer. We refuse to clean the only planet we are making less than habitable with global climate change. We destroy alliances and blame it on the other guy. We allow the leaders who have betrayed us to preen and gloat about how well they're doing while mocking the poor and helpless. This is who we've become. Now, if you're happy with the way Dumpster is caging children, selling off national monuments, scamming the government for every cent he can get, and just generally making America the laughing stock of the world, ironic that the Republicans have tried to put that on the Democrats for years, no argument I can make will change that. But for the rest of you out there, Donald Dump is the logical step when you remove the heart as mediator between the head and the hands. Because if the purpose of life is to be heartless and to scam as many as you can, then that would be a pretty shitty life, wouldn't it? But there is a better way. And Fritz Lang knew this when he released Metropolis in 1927. It didn't take us 100 years to forget. We forgot slowly. It sunk in like an anesthetic. But now that you know, it's time to stand up and use your heart. Find that empathy we are so often influenced to set aside and resist. Heartless stupidity isn't exactly the road that leads to greatness, no matter what Fox News might say. And that's Metropolis. Will every episode of Big Box of Flicks have such a political slant? I guess we're gonna find out, won't we? Next week, we look at Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, with a moment that is so heartbreaking, you can't miss it. And there you have it. You've just survived another Ken LaSalle video. For more information about new releases, projects in the works, or even stuff from the archives, head on down to kenlasalle.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and all around social media, just as long as it's called Facebook or Twitter. Thanks for your support, as always. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, and I'll be back soon with more nonsense.